Start here. This is my Linus today. She's my blanket. She's my courage. I'm so nervous talking to you people, and I know most of you, but it's okay. So here it is. I'm Miguel Hampton. I am a photographer. I am an entrepreneur. I teach business development and growth strategies. And in 2020, I had the privilege of protesting in Louisville, specifically around what occurred to Breonna Taylor. But that wasn't the only reason. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And because what comes from that is the book that I'm presenting today. This will be the first time the public gets to see it. And then we're going to journey across whatever stages will let us bless that stage to showcase the book and to talk about it a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to go off my note cards a little bit, but you won't know if I skip, right? So is that fair? Okay, easy breezy. There is this thing up here, which is a television. It has stuff on it. You can read it if you choose. I promise I probably won't. And so hopefully it will go with me in this time frame of the things that I'm going to share. If it doesn't, just know that there was a mindset process to it, and it does all align though to some degree of the images in the book, and I will get to share that as well with you. Okay, so that being said, I grew up in this little small town. Actually, I grew up everywhere. I went to, I think the rule is I went to 7 elementary schools before I got out of elementary school. I grew up in predominantly white communities as the only Black Afro-Latino kid in the neighborhood most of the time. The word nigger was a common thread. Being chased home was a common thread as well in terms of being afraid of fighting white folks, right? And so there's this story, most of us know it, about Emmett Till. And I remember when we got to Marysville, I was in 6th grade, and I remember being chased home probably by the 6th or 7th time. And my mom was like, okay, enough of this shit. You can beat up white kids. And I could fight Black kids because I'm a fighter. I grew up in a very violent community, and we come from a domestic violence household. And so a lot of this story is emotional, which makes this book even more emotional. So I remember my mom was always giving me, who's sitting right here, by the way, has always given me the position to make my own choices. And so that day she gave me permission one more time. And there's another story we told way back when I was in 2nd grade, the first time she gave us permission. But in this scenario, she said, Gelly, you can beat up the white kids. And I was like, no, mama, they're gonna lynch me. And she was like, no, they're not. And so I said, they're not? You're sure? So cool. The short story is that I went back to school the next day and whooped ass. And so after that, very few people called me the N-word. Very few people decided they wanted to fight me ever again. And then what we also learned is I fight like a grown man at 6th grade. Scary. So fast forward, so I spent, we had this epiphany through most of my life that I have spent my life fighting the opposition, whatever that opposition is. It just so happens most of my childhood was in all white communities. So my opposition was the KKK, even in the 90s. When I graduated high school, I was one of 3 Black kids who graduated from Olentangy High School. And the day I walked across the stage, they screamed out nigger, right? So when we think about a question that WHAS asked me some years back about what a post-racial America looked like, I had no idea. I spent so much time fighting just to be in a place that didn't want me that I had no idea what it looked like to be somewhere that did. And so we fast forward life, adulthood, and we come to my wife's home, which is this area. And not much like any other area. It's full of the things that I've had to oppose, fight, but just in a different space and in somewhat in a margin of a different world. Because we live in Jeffersonville, we do business in Louisville, and the first time I had actually met Black professional people was in Louisville, Kentucky. But I also learned political, social, economic racism in a different construct than just the brutal, overt thing that exists. I learned that JCPS was a legally sanctioned, policy-driven racial construct of a school system. And it was, and I remember when we first moved here, I was working with a church and we were dissecting public policy. And I said, man, it's amazing that this is legal and that we passed this through law. And then years later, I meet this guy named Maurice Sweeney who's sitting in the back loving. He is part of the reason we land here today. And Vernay helped me become part of this thing called the African American Business Alliance. And they are fighting for African American businesses who are being opposed in a consistency in all capacities. And that story leads to the idea that economically, we are not worthy. Economically, only the few can sit at the table. Only the few can actually earn. And then I learn about these programs, these what we'll call set-asides for minority-owned businesses, that businesses, Black-owned businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, women-owned businesses have to go get certified and go through a scrutiny of ridicule in order to do business, not as if filing for an S Corp, C Corp, or an LLC, or whatever magic you got to go through already wasn't enough. And then I realized, and even that, they're like, oh, we have these goals, right? We have these goals at 15 and 18 and 20% or whatever the magic number is, and they could be lucky to hit 1%. So that's a weird thing that just happened. So we go through this process, and I'm learning where we live and this evolution of what racism really looks like. And I spin back to a place of Emmett Till again, right? Because we are constantly living with the murdering, police violence, community violence against Black, whether they're unarmed, whether they are ex-offenders or not. And there's cry, and we love social media for telling or sharing the story, but however, we don't see the change or the shift in our community. And one of the things I learned, I'm gonna jump back. I learned through a friend of mine who worked with LMPD, and he used to tell me to stay off certain streets and stay out of certain neighborhoods. And this is way before Breonna Taylor. And I remember them saying that, not say why. And they said, well, we have policies that say that we can police certain neighborhoods the way we want. And I said, that's interesting, but okay, that's an economic position. I understand that. I don't understand that, but I understand that. And so as we start seeing these things happen, and we talk about the school to prison pipeline, we talk about, the mass incarceration, even in Southern Indiana, we're talking about how the Black and Latin kids are going to jail in high school faster than the white kids for the same thing, or we're talking about expulsion rates. I happen to be in some private meetings where one of the school board presidents, I forget, not school board president, it was a superintendent at the time, talked about how they were going to create a separate high school and put all the pregnant and bad kids in there because they don't belong in that social construct of what they were creating for the utopia. And I was like, man, you really say this shit. Yeah, y'all do this and you plan it. And then I watched the Chamber of Commerce and all the corporations and the factories get behind it. And they said, well, we're going to create policy and institution that allows this to happen. I say all this because this brings me to the book. And what brings me to the book is the death of Breonna Taylor. Because if there's no protest, I'm not there. But even more importantly, it brings me to my daughter, because if she doesn't say, and I'm going to talk about this, what she says to me later, I'm not there. But we've always been there talking about change of a policy. I think today we have to have the better understanding of how we grip the norm and rip that shit apart. Right? I'm not an anarchist, but I might be. But the reality of it is that we don't change until we really force it. And I think that also brings me to the book in that space. So I go with that question because WHS asked me, what does a post-racial environment look like? I say this because as I introduce the book, part of the energy that I saw, part of the love that I saw during the protests is what it looks like. If you've never seen it, you won't know it. And if you don't think about it, you won't know it. And so, I hope that I will land this plane as we're on it, and think about it in that sense. So I want to share some stats, right? Because this leads us, everything hopefully will lead us to the book. I'm gonna say that a lot. You guys are gonna be tired of it. I'm gonna walk out here and be like, Miguel said it leads us to the book. So everybody in here has a book, right? So if you participated during 2020, you have a book, you have a story, and I want you to tell it. If you participated in after 2020, because there's been a lot of after 2020, you have a story and I want you to tell it, because the only way we change the environment that we live in is when we all speak about that story. So I want to say this because these are things I knew and didn't know, right? And I'm a person who loves patterns. I like to connect dots, and I won't connect all the dots here, but I want to connect a few. So in 2020, I was looking at a series of things, and we were frustrated looking at the internet, and I tend to like to go on a rock and close off the world and ignore what is happening, right? Some of us have the privilege of never seeing what's happening. I think in 2020 it changed though for all of us, right? Because the one thing that happened is the pandemic, and that means we were all focused on the same things. And we started to see things differently, right? We started seeing what the other side was saying or not saying, et cetera, et cetera. But I talk about this one thing because we're here because Breonna Taylor was assassinated in her home by the police. And she was not the first, and nor was she the last. And what's even more interesting is that we don't even mention all the people who were killed in that first 3 to 4 months of that same period. And so I want to share this. On March 3rd, Manuel Ellis was killed in Tacoma, Washington. On March 13th, Breonna Taylor was killed in Louisville, Kentucky. On March 23rd, Daniel Pride was killed in New York. And April 29th, Malcolm Milky Williams was killed in Jeffersonville. May 25th, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. June 12th, Rashad Brooks in Atlanta. May 6th, Sean Reed in Indiana. And so on and so forth. And so we're really talking about a trend. And I only looked within a 700-mile radius, 700 miles, right? I looked in a 700 mile, but even more importantly, right, less than a mile from here, it happened. We talk about Louisville and we talk about Breonna Taylor, but in less than a mile, within a month, someone was killed in Jeffersonville. And it's not a conversation that we have. Right? State police, LMPD. I remember very specifically in Jeff when a lot of the LMPD officers were getting laid off, and some were being suspended for other things that they had done in Louisville. And I learned that they were being hired in Jeffersonville. And I remember being extremely appalled that we would hire white cops, or black cops for that matter, I didn't really care, but we were hiring specifically white cops who were allowed to reign unchecked under Fisher and the police chiefs over here's guides in the West End. And they were part of that group that my friend said, hey, Miguel, stay out of this side of town. And I remember calling Bobby Campbell and the chief of police and Jeff and a couple other people. And I said, why would we even begin to hire these folks? I said, they're being sued in other cities for racially profiling, for da-da-da-da-da, yada, yada, yada. And I remember they all said something to me that I thought was interesting. One, they said they already live here, which tells me that they were already doing what they've been doing. Two, they said they're genuinely good people. They were taking orders. And I had to process that for a minute. You know, they're genuinely good people. I think we are genuinely good people. But they were taking orders, which means that systemically, this is a thing that we're dealing with. We're not dealing with the individual. We're dealing with the policy that is in place. And that's what leads us to the book. That's what leads us to our story. I looked at that, and I apologize for those of y'all. This is a triggering conversation, and maybe you will help me craft this differently. Definitely those of us who are down there together and have to, through some process, relive this. I was looking at a stat on 2020 between January and August, and it said that 164 Black people were killed by police. That's an average of one person a week, right? And it just, you know, again, just before Breonna Taylor, I would say, man, we're not being affected like that. Like, the violence exists. We do know that Black and brown people are going to jail disproportionately. We do know that our kids are being affected disproportionately, but we're at least not, and it sucks to say this out loud, at least we're not being killed, right? traumatized having somebody put a gun into your head. You can live through that, right? I remember the day I got a ticket in front of the house, and the cop told me if I was going to continue to live in Jeffersonville, I should know all the laws. And I said, well, fool, I'm the one who wrote the one you're telling me I did. And it's not real. This is the wrong ordinance in the wrong side of town. But either way I go, I paid the ticket. It was an amazing day when I saw him at the grocery store, as if we weren't people and we weren't going to be walking around in plain clothes one day. But I say that because the amount of violence that happens through our administrations and the tools in the toolbox that they have access to use that's the thing that we often have to look at and change. And those are the things I think we sometimes ignore. But that leads us to the book. So yeah, I won't give any more stats because they're heavy and my eyes are watering and I don't like them. But there are a ton of stats. If you choose to look, they are there. And if we want to understand the cause, right, there are action steps that led to Breonna's death, murder. But there is a cause, and the cause is the administration, whether it was yesterday's or today's, because the policies are still the same, right? We, on the surface, will do a lot of things. But realistically, it's under the belly. We have to gut it out. We have to pull the insides of the thing and rewrite the position so that this doesn't occur again. I mean, it is statistically said that since 2024, police brutality in the Black communities has risen. Right? So a lot to be said with Trump being in office, but it was before Trump. And I think that's the other thing too. We like to blame the people who are currently here, but it's been here. And until we see it as a people and shift it differently, when our elected officials or those who want to run for office can't address it, won't talk about the eradication of it. When you ask them, what does equity look like in your community? When you ask them what a post-racial community looks like, if they don't have an answer, we shouldn't be electing them. But that brings us to the book. All right, I got a whole bunch of other notes and stuff. Like this one says, so I write all these little crazy things and I think they're supposed to land with these stories, but sometimes when I actually don't follow my speech, I get lost in the story, right? Shook's probably like, why am I sitting here? I told you you're my Linus. I appreciate you today.
You're welcome.
Because she brings us to the book. And hopefully, she will brave this conversation and she will share, because again, I'm not sitting here without her and the influence of her mom. And the influence of many of the people sitting in this room. But I say this, we are not short on greatness. We are short on courage to eradicate our norms. We are not short on greatness. We are all great people. But most of the time, we do not muster the courage to strip away the thing that hurts us the most. And I hope that at some point in time in your nation, not nation as a globe, but not nation as America, but nation as a people, a group of people who have decided that we want to do something different, that we find the courage to literally strip away the norm and to rewrite it. But that comes to everyone in this room having a story and telling that story. I've known oppression my whole life, and most of us have. James Baldwin said it, and he's someone I love to read because so much of what he said is so relevant today. But even more interesting, there's a gentleman named Dr. P.O. Sweeney who I read, who happened to be Maurice Sweeney's dad, said some stuff in the 30s and 40s that sound like James Baldwin said in the 60s. But we all inherited this thing called racism. And how we live with it, how we focus with it has been a choice we have all made. And what it looks like tomorrow will equally be that choice. That one just says we need a true north. I don't know where I was going. North. We were going north, okay. North. My clicker is not clicking. She went to sleep. Hold on, let's see what happened here. All right, let's see if she clicks. Oh, there it is. Look, there's just a bunch of pictures of me. So look, there's one of my favorite people. She's sitting back there, I see her. What's up, Nikki? I get here because of her too. She gives me language sometimes. Didn't know I had language. That's a piece too, right? I think, and again, I'm gonna ramble across this. I have all these experiences. Sometimes I don't have language. I have all these experiences, and I remember before I had agency, I just had the experience. And it's important that we as a community build agency for each other, and we give each other language. And And I say this when I say language is important because my wife will tell you that I am a horrible wordsmith or I'm a really great one because I make up my own words.
Word splicer.
Okay, word splicer, right? I will use whole sentences in one word, and I will use a word that does not exist and give it a definition. So if I do that, here's your fault. But things we all know. We all know violence in different levels. We all know economic poverty at some level or another. We all understand political oppression. And we all very much know, even today, political segregation. And these are things that we have to face because these are the things that will also lead us to this book. All right, somebody asked me why 5 years did I get here? Why did it take me 5 years to get here? I'm not gonna answer that today. You can ask me this and I'll share this one-on-one. But I shared a lot of it, trauma. And my wife told me while we were protesting that I was undoing everything that I had done to make me safe in that year's time. Wasn't a whole year, it just felt like a year. But because I'm gonna tear up, because I remember every shot that I took, I remember every video, I remember what happened before, I remember what happened after, and there are at least 3 occurrences that if anything could emasculate someone who was not afraid to die, that moment did. That also brings us to the book. Who am I, right? There's a whole part I was supposed to share. Who am I? There's a card here that says that. Why? Why the book? Reconciliation. That's part of it. There's not a lot of words in the book, probably because I don't have a lot of words. That's a lie, because y'all know I like to talk. But yeah, it's reconciliation. It's a reckoning. In many ways, that's kind of where my mind is. I'm a photographer, graphic designer. Sometimes I just create stuff. Sometimes we have words, and sometimes we use them, but we don't know the definition. Or the reason of why we're using it, because some of them have so many different definitions, and there's a spelling wrong, that's just normal, get over it. But it's a reckoning for me, maybe for you too, tell your story. Some people will also, very specifically my wife, will say that I'm very contrary, and that's probably true. That also leads us to the book. I'm also, what's that word? Pedantic. Right? That's a fun word. It's one of the fun words that I can never really say all the time. I try to use it in class and everybody just looks at me nuts. I'm also didactic, but also brings us to the book. So I'm sharing a little bit of who I am and why. And then I don't know how I guess you can't really be semantic because it's a noun, but I guess I am, because every time my wife and I talk about things, she's like, yeah, it's semantics. And then sometimes I have to think about it in the sense that, is it though really? Like, is she using it the way that I'm receiving it? Or do I have a different definition? Like, my daughter calls me weird. And when she was really, really little, I used to be like, I'm so offended, my daughter thinks I'm weird. And then one day I just looked up and found a definition that worked for me. And it just means extraordinary, out of the box. Right? I don't fit the norm. That brings us to the book. So fast forward, how we get here. I'm sitting in the office and I get this phone call, and I work late, it's really pandemic. I don't know what the hell I was doing, honestly, because we really weren't working. We were fighting to keep the business open. But the phone rings, and nonetheless I answer it, and it's the wife. Tia says, hey, your daughter wants to talk to you. And it might go down like this. It's in the book. You can read it. But she says, I said, okay, cool. And so Shug's like, and I'll paraphrase, you're welcome to jump in at any given time. She said that I want to go down and protest. And I was like, no, absolutely not. We're not. We're not doing that. No, not at all. And then I remember pause, and Tia got on the phone, and she was like, why not? I didn't have a why not. I mean, mentally, I knew that it was violent, it was dangerous. I know that whatever can happen in that space can happen in that space, and I can't predict it. I knew that. But Tia said, why not? And then she said something unique. And if you're with me and my family, you know, there's a mantra, I'm always coming home. Because no matter what situation I've ever gotten into, I've always come home. And Tia said, why not you? And I said, well, fair. Why not me? I know how to navigate that scenario of a situation. All right, let's go. And so I asked Shug, and Shug says very clearly why, when I said why, and she said, because I have a voice. But that was also a turn point. You know, my 16-year-old kid who was watching this happen systemically most of her life, whether I see it through her eyes or not, says something that I can hear and see very clear. It's her voice. And not who am I to get in the way, but who am I to help uplift it? And so I said, fine, let's go. And that leads us to a moment. So I'm gonna walk through the book, pieces. Some of the stuff I'll show you isn't in there, some of it is. This is something that came in 21 after protesting that whole year. We did a live stream on my podcast called Common Conversations about all the things that we were experiencing. It was a 2-day live stream. I thought I was CNN or something. But I'm just gonna let that play. I'm not gonna let you listen to the poem, but if you want, one of the young ladies from the Youth NAACP wrote a poem for me when I did this. But these are just segments of the first night that we went down, which was technically night 2. And then one night we were down there at the square, and there was this gentleman, they set this piano out there, and this gentleman just started playing the piano. And it was such a moment, because when I talk about the energy and love in the environment, it's surreal. And him playing, you know, one of these days I'll go extract just that, and I'll let it. But I remember that night so clearly. You know, I remember all these marches. But you know, again, we land because Shug said, I have a voice. And I didn't expect to be down there more than one day. I suspected we would go down and we would march, and I would do what I was going to do for her, and that's say, this is how violence looks like. Mom told me once that if you wanted to understand chaos, stand in the center of it. And I said, this is what we're gonna play with. We're gonna go to the outer ring where there will be very little happening. There will be an inner ring. And it'll be a little bit more exciting. There'll probably be chanting, but not much will be happening. And then we'll go to a circle where will be a calm. And right outside that calm will be the front line. Here's the rule. You don't run. If you get afraid, you hold on to me. When I say move, we move. But you don't run. And we can go as close or as far away from it as you choose. It's your choice. But no matter what, you don't run. And we did. And she was brave enough at 16. You good?
That's loud. Yeah, sorry.
You're fine. She was brave enough at 16. Curious enough at 16. She had the courage enough at 16 to say, Dad, I want to go all the way to the front. It's her experience, her witness, and when she wants to tell her story, it's her story to tell. But I can just tell how I got there, and that leads us to the book. You good? Mm-hmm. All right. At least you don't look like one of them TV shows where all your makeup starts turning black, shit starts running down your face, you look like the Grudge.
What is wrong with you? I blocked most of that summer out, so seeing it is kind of reliving all of it. And sorry, y'all.
You good, back.
I can't believe I did that at 16, because I'm 21 now. And I think I was still going to school. I don't think they shut down the schools at that time. I think I was still going, and I was hearing my classmates talk badly about the protesters, and I'm one of them, and talking about how they're destroying property and how we were violent. And I was just so angry because they're not down there. They're not seeing what I saw. And to talk about the book, when my dad showed it to me, I started crying because I think that was the first time that I realized that, like, I don't remember that summer, because a lot of us handle trauma differently. And my way of handling that specifically, because I grew up relatively sheltered. I didn't grow up in that kind of chaotic environment or like any kind of environment like that at all. And so experiencing that, my initial reaction was to block all of it out. Because the first night I'm seeing people pour milk on their faces because they're getting, the gas, because it's burning them. And then another time, it was way after, I remember this very clearly, it was a black woman, and she was being pinned down by all of these cops. And I'm seeing all these black men, I'm seeing my dad, who is someone that I'm sorry. See, is like a protector, and he couldn't do anything. You know, and I know that if he could, he would have. And like, I just saw how helpless he was, how helpless all these black men were, and how all we could do was watch. And so I was just so angry because I'm hearing my classmates, my teachers, talk terribly about the people that were standing next to me, about my parents, about my aunt, about myself. And I'm like, y'all aren't here. And y'all care more about these businesses and these monuments and these parks more than y'all care about the people that are dying, about the people that did die. Because there's also a moment that I'm remembering as I'm talking about it. I remember it was an hour before my parents and my aunt, we left hour after, we left the protesting, and we were sitting in this spot, and we had left, and then an hour later, we learned that someone got killed, and he was standing in that exact spot that we were sitting in. And I'm thinking, like, if we were there for an hour longer, that could have been me, it could have been my dad, it could have been my aunt, it could have been my mom. And so all of that is just circling through my head of like all of this, and that was a really hard year, and I can't believe I was 16 doing any of that, because I don't think I thought about how that would impact me as an adult, and how that would impact me in school, and how that would impact my relationships with white people and my friends and all these things. So I thank my dad for putting this story out, because it brought back a lot that I kept in, and it kind of is helping me work through some of that. So that's my little 2 cents. Thank you.
Let's go. Thank you.
God.
Right? Because it brings us to the book. So we go out night 2, and we're walking and we're talking, and we go home about midnight-ish. Something that happens night 2, which I thought was really neat or unique, is that while we were protesting, and I think we were walking down 3rd Street, right next to the Omni, before the Omni lost its windows, we were walking, and there was these young folks who were chanting, and they're kind of organizing, and I remember seeing a handful of tall white gentlemen in all black, with black hoods and black masks, and they started handing out hammers, and they started handing out wrenches, And I remember watching that slowly, and I said, wow, this shit is about to go left. And I remember one of the young black girls, black women, at the front of the line saying, that's not what we're here for. And I said, how interesting, right? Like, what is this? Well, we continue to march, and we watched them break off. I didn't have my camera that night, but we watched them break off and begin to brutalize the neighborhood, right, the downtown area. And I remember as we were walking, this part is kind of funny, not funny, but we were walking, we're by where WHAS is, and somebody tried to kick in the door. They had really strong windows, they're smart. But there's a strip club across the street from WHAS, or in some proximity of, and one of the kids thought it was okay that they could burn a rubber plant.
Oh my God,
not
that was
really
so
smart,
stupid.
because they couldn't quite figure why it wouldn't catch fire, and I was like, you guys are idiots.
Rubber plant.
Right? Either way it goes, I mean, I remember that person in the front said, hey, this is not what we're here for. Right? So the point I tell about that story is that it only takes one or two people who often are plants to take something that is peaceful, to disrupt it, to change a narrative. And I also say that because it was later in a board meeting where that particular light came up in question months later. And I'm listening to a handful of people, 25 people who are leaders in our community, both Southern Indiana and Kentucky, talk about something that they were not there for. And they were sharing this narrative that was completely opposite of what I saw. And I remember sitting in a room and I said, that's not what happened. This is actually what happened. And he said, how would you know? I said, because I was there. I was standing there when they started handing out the hammers, and I can tell you at what time they broke the first window, because I was walking next to them. It wasn't the black kids. It was a handful of tall white kids in all black. I fast forward because we come home after night 2, and I get this phone call. You didn't take me? I said, huh? I didn't know we were going. No, I would have went. I want to go. And I said, well, let's get in the car. We ain't got nothing else to do. So this is morning 3, after the aftermath of us walking night 2. And this is Ninny. This is Nikki, my sister-in-law, my sister-in-love, my second wife.
He needs two. I need her.
And she's like, I want to go. I said, cool. Well, let's go down the next morning and see what it looks like. Let's see what's happening after the evening of protest. And so we started walking around, and I very specifically wanted to start on what I saw start, because I wanted to see, because we went home about midnight. These windows were still there when we went home. They weren't there when we got back the next morning. So whatever happened after we left at midnight, that story, nothing good happens after midnight. But what I found really neat is there's a story, and as we connect dots. And that is, what's the date? 1949, there's a riot in that same spot. Right, we have a plaque for almost the same reason, except for people didn't die, they just weren't allowed to eat at the same lunch counter. That's right. Same cafeteria. Louisville has a history. America has a history. That leads us to the book. We can see what's coming next. If we just pay attention, we can also shift the next if we just get involved. So we're walking around, and we got to see, all these fun things. And when you get a chance to look at the book, there's like some notes in there. I do kind of chronicle a tad bit of what our experience is. And Shug was just pointing out all the things. Don't forget it's COVID, so we're wearing masks. In some cases, we're like wearing 3 and 4 and 5 masks. Like we would literally go protest in like six different droves of clothes, go home and shower like we had to quarantine, and then go back out. It was ridiculous. It was probably why we lost all that weight, because we had on like 80 sweatshirts. We wore black every day and 6 masks. It was nuts. But yeah, so this was kind of our journey through. And so if you weren't down there, you'll get to see some things that they didn't tell you about, right? If you were down there, these were great moments, right? We don't do picnics for my white friends, right? That's a whole historical thing. We ain't gonna get into that. We do barbecues, right? We were doing cookouts. and barbecues. And there's this thing, and some of y'all know better than I do. Like there's this policy that says what a community is. And what by law and rule of law that you can do that constitutes a community. And these folks built a community at the square. They had a garden, right? Because you got to be able to feed people. They had an edible garden. Let's go. They had a medical facility, right? Because you had to be able to treat people. You had a place where people could rest. Like they had all the things, and literally it was a community of people voicing, not beating. Were people armed to some degree? Not so much. Right, but we get to do that in America because Second Amendment rights. But it was peaceful, and here it was a celebration in a time that most of us should have been crying. They weren't asking for anything abnormal, just to be able to live in peace and know that that peace would not be disrupted by policy or rule of law or a set of orders by people who will follow them. Journey, right? Just it's a great piece. So graphically, I sat back, and it took me a while to get here. But I just saw these different collections of these different days. On Breonna Taylor's birthday, a lot of folks came out. There was some crowds when different groups came out on the stairs, and so I just was able to kind of, when I wasn't protesting and throwing my fist up, grabbed the camera and just kind of did a wraparound and just really started shooting or filming all the different people. Because here's another thing. It was such a collection of people. There were black, brown, women, men, gay, trans. It didn't matter. It was the melting pot of what we identify as America, who was standing there saying, this is not what we want. Better yet, they were standing there saying, this is what we want. So just part of that journey. And you some of the signs, I don't know if you would, I love that there's a collection of museum should have so go and find all the signs. Because I think I saw a sign for every walk of life, like Jews for black people, witches for black people. I was like, oh my God, like if you could create a sign, someone created a sign, right?
Dan did.
Yeah, and so this is just kind of part of that space. And then there were pieces where I just felt like I turn a lot of shots black and white because I think black and white is timeless. And I didn't grow up in the 60s, but I witnessed it through history and through stories and through documentary and book. And I have the privilege of having friends that are 70, 80, and 90 years old, and they shared. And we get to live our 60s, right? This is our 60s, which is ridiculous. This is our civil rights movement. The very thing that we thought we solved, we still exist in, right? And so when I see these shots, I remember hearing the story that there were white folks lynched in our timelines, right? And going to Alabama and visiting the museum, there's a whole recollection and there's a story. There's a whole website to talk about the cities and where folks were lynched at and when and how. And it's something to think about. But again, as I journey through this space, it was really the collective of people who, if it wasn't their first time, they at least had enough. And they were strong enough to say, I have a voice. They had enough courage to say, this is my voice. And they made signs. Donald Trump is a child rapist. I still love that one. Hate will not make us great. There's some fun ones that are really uplifting, right? And you gotta love the ones that are uplifting, but I do love the ones that were a little grudgery. But and they used to do these caravans that wrapped around the city. And they would roll up, and 90 times out of 10, they were pretty peaceful, unless we were being accosted by police officers to some degree. This was one of the days where they were building out the memorial, and I took a lot of pictures of the day. Like I remember when there was nothing there, and then all of a sudden where it was like everything was there, and everybody came down there and paid homage and planted, just so many seeds. Again, this time that was full of drama is really full of love. This was when they closed the 2nd Street Bridge. That was crazy. I don't know if y'all remember that. They hung a sign up on there and they came and shut down the 2nd Street Bridge, and a handful of people were protesting. The young lady on the far right-hand side on day one was shot in the face by rubber bullets. She's 16 in this picture. Just her perseverance, her story is alone if you ever get a chance to meet her, and she shared with you. Yeah, just brilliant. All these folks have a story while they were there. I remember specifically this day because I was at work, was doing something for somebody, and I went down there and one of the cops grabbed me. And it wasn't a bad grab. I was in the way of something and he was trying to remove me. What I learned is when you carry a gun, they deal with you differently. I carry a gun and a camera, so they deal with me differently. But one of the lead protesters jumped in the cop's face and said, "You don't touch this one, not him." I still don't understand that. One day I'll get to talk to him and ask what that was. But that was a moment when I often, if you know me well enough, I'll say I'm nobody, I'm insignificant in this. But that was a moment that reminded me that maybe I am somebody and I am significant in this, right? I'm not just someone standing on a line with them, right? Because we all matter, but sometimes in my own brain, I'm like, I don't matter any more relevancy to anyone else that's here. But that moment, for whatever reason, that happened, and that said a lot that day. I ended up staying and missing the rest of my appointments. So this is Nini. We just kicking it. One of my favorite shots was the Not Fucking Around crew came down and hung out, and that was a very full day, and they had signs wrapped around like all the different protests that were happening across the country, which were really amazing, and I was able to just kind of grab shots of all of that because, some of these things that I wasn't even aware of, right? And the fact that you have so many people coming down and sharing the story, and the fact that, they wrote right there, the world is listening. I got this book produced in Greece. It's handmade, all of it. They only make them one at a time. And it was the guy I met who I think helped me make the final decision, regardless of how expensive this book is to have made. He saw what I had on the iPad, 2 or 3 images, and said, "This is a story the world should hear. You need to do the book." Right? And so just these moments give me that time and that space. And there's a lot of video footage from a lot of this as well. But these are kids we know. These are kids that went to Jeff Hod, they went to Manual, they're grown adults now. Here we are. This was an amazing day. Of course, that guy in the middle on the foreground is the one who goes to jail for something he didn't do, but that's another story, as you can tell. So it's kind of the transference, right? The fact that we've got, one guy and 3 women standing there, protesting, and they're actually looking at the militia that's standing on the corner, fully arsenal. This is a shout out to Malcolm Milky Williams when we protested in Jeff. Because again, this was a story that no one was talking about. This kid got shot in his car in the back with his pregnant girlfriend sitting next to him, right? And the laws of the state of Indiana says that our state police don't have to wear body camera, right? And just a whole different dynamic, but policies and laws allow this to happen on an ongoing basis. Our guy Travis, this is a voice I will never forget. One of the few protesters who magically died shortly after the protest. But Ali, great kid, had his own traumas, on his own issues, but this, if he protested, this was a voice for me that brought harmony. Just to hear this kid, I knew it was time to march because you would hear this, it was, for me, it would be like going to college again and hearing the Greeks do their thing. You knew it was time to march. You knew it was time for something to be said when you heard Travis's voice and you heard his chants. Yeah. This is the night. This is the day actually. All the people like Nikki get out of jail. Because the city of Louisville wanted to charge everybody with felonies for protesting. And this was when they were fighting the case and they were waiting for the charges to be dropped. And so Attica Scott was there and a lot of reporters were there and were out on the step. And so this is close to probably one of the few of the last days that we were down there, but pretty good time. A lot of love. David McAtee, that's all I can say about this shot, short version of this story, before the night that they sent military to the West End. There was a curfew downtown. Curfew was downtown. And they sent the military to the West End, and that cause and result is David McAtee is killed doing the thing he does every Sunday. I remember being so pissed off about that. I called Maurice and I was like, I need to be in Fisher's office the next morning. I would make this happen. I don't know if I quite said it like that, but, and magically I'm in Fisher's office the next morning and I said, my dude, like, the fuck was you thinking? I was like, do you know historically, when you send the military to a black community, people die? Yes, it's war. Our military's job is not to police, it is to occupy, and we occupy through violence. Someone was going to die that night. It happened in Philadelphia, it happened in Oklahoma, it happened in Watts, right? Like, how do you not know our history? It's American history, not black history, because it's America that deploys the military. Here's a fun, crazy story, and when you connect the dots, you begin to realize the ignorance. Because Fisher passed a law, a gang law, that Mississippi abandoned because it was so crippling to the black community that they could no longer keep it in place. And it was a law that they created to help the black community. I mean, you chew on that shit for a minute, right? They created a law to help the black people that ultimately hurt the black people in Mississippi. And then Mississippi got rid of the law, and Fisher said, hey, you know, let's enact this law here to slow down the black kids who are gathering downtown. Like, I'm like, where's the math, homie? Like, how do you not know history? But you know what? History doesn't matter. Sometimes we can say we're ignorant to the history, right? Because we understand the systemic issues that we face, and some of us would rather keep them. And I'm not saying Fisher is a racist person. I generally like the guy, know him pretty well, right? But sometimes the policies, we can all be uplifters of colonial behavior, right? So David McAtee. Yep, I got you. All right, so these are just arrests and stops. And so, yeah, we are Legion, which is against white supremacy. So with a lot of great signs, a lot of energy. I'm gonna shift through this, I'll wrap up, but this is probably some of the funnest moments, some of the most energy-driven people, young folk. Like, these cats had chants, these cats had dances. They would crunk dance. If you don't know what crunk dance is, go look that up. But it's just you cannot, there's very few words that can describe these moments right here. And you had to be standing there because they were completely random. They just, Taz and them would just have this moment of blah, 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 blah. And somebody would scream out, fuck 12. And then somebody would scream out something else, no justice, no peace. And these cats would just get down. And then all of a sudden they'd have circles of droves of people doing it with them. And you could just, the goal here was really just to capture the energy in the moment. They are some of the beautiful, most nicest dudes you will meet. I remember when they came to Jeffersonville, and they pulled guns out on them, and I was like, y'all need to go back across the river, they'll kill you over here. They won't kill you over there, they already did it. But over here is a little different. You need to go back. And they would say, yeah, we're going back across the river. So this was just pure anarchy. This guy, I don't know if he was Antifa, but he was definitely a white supremacist down there doing his thing and causing a lot of ruckus, bringing chaos to the peace. So this, just moments. I hate this moment. I hate it because it's the story my daughter describes. I was standing next to a young lady, right or wrong, who didn't know better. So this moment's happening. These guys are fully tactical, they're doing their thing, right? So you would think these guys are coming to interrupt the white dudes with the guns, right? No, not so much. So they come to mess with that dude who's standing in front of the police car and eventually was the three ladies that was with him, right? So they marched, and there's a line of us, and I'm taking pictures of them coming, and they end up creating two lanes. There's a drove of them in front, a row in front, and a row behind us, and so they separate us as protesters. And there's two young ladies, I think they were from West Virginia. One is in a circle where the police are, and the other one's on the other side with us. And everybody's chanting, they're screaming, they're just doing their thing, right? It's just screaming. And this young lady doesn't know that you don't break formation. You don't break through their formation. This is something that you have to do to understand or see. And I remember her screaming. I have video of it. I just lose my shit every time I watch it. But I remember she was screaming, she was doing her thing, she was screaming, and she began to break the police line. And me and this dude that was standing next to her tried to grab her and pull her back. Now, mind you, I'm carrying a camera in one hand, and he's carrying a gun in his. And we go to grab her, and we could not get her. And they picked her up, broke 3 of her ribs, her nose, slammed her face to the ground. And I remember, like, you don't have to do that. And this cop looked at me and said, "You're right." And then the cop standing next to him, as I proceeded to walk through them, because I looked at him like, "I fucking dare you." He said, "Will you please just go down the line?" I'm crazy enough to understand that moment. Because there was nothing I could do but live through the experience. And I'm smart enough to walk around and go to the captain to be like, "Stop that shit. You got her. You don't need a dozen of you on one girl." I said, "Do me like that." And the dude said, "You're carrying a gun." You know, that's a story in itself. That's a story in itself. I'm like, so had I not been carrying a gun, you would have tried? This is the wrap up. It tells a lot of the story. It probably appears more violent than it really is, because the protests in Louisville were by protesters, peaceful. I watched the biggest gang in the city shoot at us from the top of rooftops. Those are days I didn't have my camera because I knew we needed to leave and leave quick. I watched them beat people. I watched them kill people. Live, on live. These are the traumas that we need to share because these are the things that don't go away. These are the things we live with. These are the things that she has to remember, I will remember. More importantly, we have to change the policies that allow these things to happen. And that brings us to the book. Breonna will not be the last. She was ours. Malcolm Milky Williams, who many of you don't know, was ours. These were kids that we knew. We knew their families. We know their families. But that brings us to the book. That brings us how my family and I got down. Thank you, Suge. Yeah. So we created this book. We're selling this book. It is expensive. It's $650. It's a low margin book. I have to say that aloud, but it's a handcrafted book. And there is an ideology behind why this is. And one is, when I was sharing it and I couldn't get through it, I sent a bunch of stuff to my brother and a bunch of other people. And my brother's like, "You need to do a book." And, the wife and Nikki said, "You need to do something." And Maurice was like, "You need to do something." And this is what it is. And these are folks that are constantly in my ear who are like, "You need to do something." And even on some really dark days, I had a chance to talk to Luan over here and Maurice, and she inspired me not to do it. So we did it. Regardless of the rotten reason, we're here. People can buy it. I have created and crafted it in such a way that I think it should be a collector's edition, which means that we will not print another one like this. I'm only gonna print 1,000, that's what we agreed, that 1,000 will be printed. Maurice and I have gone back and forth in part of this planning and saying that maybe this is a way for it should live in our museums and it should live in our libraries. It should become an archival piece that we identify and that people can go and research and look at. And maybe the whole collection of my images and everybody else's images should land there as well some point in time. So you can't own a piece of this, so I have to put my sales hat on and stop crying. But you can't own a piece of this. There is a certificate of authenticity that goes with it that says that we're only going to print 1,000. I'm going to sign each one of those. You can keep it for yourself. You can donate it to a library. If you know a philanthropist or you know a foundation who would be like, "Hey, I'm interested in doing this, and we want to give this to our library," whether that library is in Tuvalu, I don't know if that's a real place, or Puerto Rico. that's a space that's there. We've also created something because I created a nonprofit this year called Common Conversations. Well, it's been a podcast now. It's a 501c3 thanks to Missy and her push. I told you I got a lot of friends and family here. Thank you very much. And so we've done something there too. It's a little bit more in that space because of laws, and we can take advantage. Like, so it's a tax write-off, but it's a gift. You can't buy the book. You get a gift for $1,000 donation in that relationship, and we'll ship the book. So you can do it for yourself, or if you want to send it to a library, you can do that as well. Understand that I only have 10 copies today, and I'm gracious to say Maurice bought copy 2 already, and Maria is gifted book 1. And so if you choose to buy a book for yourself or someone else, you'll get that, or we're gonna log who has what version and what series. And so there's lots of ways to do this. I am working on a commercial version of it. I still have to psychologically remove myself from the pain and stake of looking at all those pictures sometimes and remember all the moments. But I am gonna create a less expensive version once we start getting through this process. And so as we continue to share, and I'll take any feedback because I'll probably have to figure out this narrative so it's not so free when I sit in a room full of people who don't know me. I appreciate Monkey for sitting up here. I call her Monkey, excuse me. For Shug, Maria for sitting up here, because I kind of asked her a couple days ago. I didn't ask her initially when I said I was going to do this. I was like, hey, you want to sit up here with me? And she was like, yeah. And then I was like, well, if you want to say something, you can. I'm not going to tell you to do anything. And she doesn't, no one ever really knows what I'm going to say. It's just par for the course. So I do appreciate you.
Yes, thank you
I don't
for
have this
letting me.
experience without you. You know what I mean? So.
Well, you let me go, so I don't have that without you.
Nah, there it is. Let's get it. But questions, thoughts, opinions, you're welcome to look. This is the first time. So the prototype of the book, I'm not allowing people to actually touch the actual book. So when you buy it, it's yours, and you can touch it yourself, but I will sign it, and I will sign a certificate inside it as well. But you can look at it. So the prototype of the book, everything is in there except for like the volume and author and the buyer page and all that fun stuff. But if you want to see like the entire and how it's manufactured and all that fun stuff, you can. And I'll take suggestions and thoughts. So I got nothing else. I appreciate y'all. Thank you very much. Questions, thoughts, opinions? Okay. Thank you.